Ryan pressed play on the video. Marcus, alone in his bathroom, deliberately slamming his arm against the counter until it bruised. "This better work," Elena gasped. For months she'd believed her son's lies, refused Ryan's calls, thrown him out of his own house. Now the truth lay scattered across the coffee shop table. $8,000 stolen, text messages bragging about manipulation, divorce papers already signed. "So what if I did?" Marcus shouted. "You were miserable anyway." Ryan stood, gathered his papers. 30 days, then you're out." Elena reached for him. He pulled away. Behind him, ruins. Ahead, truth. And truth was worth everything. It was an ordinary afternoon when my world shattered. Standing in the driveway while my belongings sailed through the air from the upstairs window felt surreal, like watching someone else's tragedy unfold. My spouse, Elena, stood at that window consumed by fury I'd never witnessed before. The demand was simple: leave her property immediately. The irony wasn't lost on me. The house deed bore only my signature. Hours earlier, we'd shared morning coffee like any other day. Now her teenage son, Marcus, stood behind her, hand protectively on her shoulder. When our eyes met through the glass, I caught something disturbing, a fleeting expression of victory before his features rearranged into concern. That brief glimpse revealed everything. This destruction wasn't accidental. It was orchestrated. My name is Ryan, age 38. My profession involves commercial equipment distribution, the kind of stable, unglamorous work that keeps lights on but rarely sparks conversations. 12 years with the same employer brought predictable income and minimal excitement. My wildest weekly decision typically involved choosing lunch venues. Elena entered my life at a neighborhood cafe where she managed operations. She possessed remarkable qualities: warmth, intelligence, and the weight of widowhood following her husband's death 3 years prior. Her son Marcus, then 13, carried the unmistakable burden of early parental loss. I recognized that trauma leaves permanent marks. Our connection was immediate. Elena had this gift for making you feel uniquely seen during conversations. After 8 months of dating, I proposed. She accepted through tears. I made promises to both of them, never attempting to replace Marcus's father, but offering unwavering support. Those weren't empty words. The initial 2 years exceeded expectations. Marcus maintained emotional distance, which I understood completely. I never demanded father-son dynamics or insisted on titles. I offered homework assistance when requested, provided transportation to social gatherings, covered phone bills and clothing without maintaining scorecards. When marriage arrived, I purchased a larger residence, ensuring Marcus had proper space, a real bedroom instead of the cramped quarters from Elena's former apartment. Elena radiated happiness. We existed in contentment. Marcus seemed to be adjusting. Looking backward with clarity only hindsight provides, I can pinpoint exactly when the foundation began cracking, when subtle poison started infiltrating our marriage, slowly and persistently, like water eroding stone over centuries. Approximately 9 months ago, Marcus began making comments to his mother. Sometimes I'd overhear fragments when entering rooms, statements that seemed affectionate on the surface but carried an unsettling undercurrent. He'd compliment her appearance, suggest she deserved treatment befitting royalty, mention she could pursue modeling. Initially, this registered as typical teenage praise for a parent. Endearing, right? Then references to his deceased father emerged. Whenever Elena and I established boundaries, curfews, academic expectations, basic household expectations, Marcus would invoke variations of "Dad would have allowed this" or "Dad understood me better." Elena initially shut down these comparisons firmly, reminding him I treated them well and that contrasts were unfair. But the remarks continued, subtle, constant, gradually wearing down her resistance. He questioned why they needed to follow my rules in what he termed their house. The fact that I'd purchased the property, held the title, paid monthly mortgage obligations without complaint, none of that mattered in Marcus's revisionist narrative. In his version of reality, this space belonged to them. I was merely an occupant. I attempted discussing this with Elena, suggesting Marcus struggled with adjustment and proposing family counseling. She dismissed it as typical adolescent behavior, insisting I was oversensitive. But I noticed her examining me differently sometimes, studying me, searching for something, as though Marcus's words were planting seeds of doubt that were beginning to sprout. Then, roughly 4 months ago, things evolved into something that made me question my sanity. Marcus became essentially two different people depending on his mother's presence. When Elena was nearby, he transformed, laughing, joking with me, acting like companions, using my first name casually, inquiring about my day, appearing genuinely fascinated by my mundane equipment sales anecdotes. The instant Elena left the room, literally the second she passed beyond earshot, his expression would become completely blank, neutral, as if someone flipped an internal switch deactivating his personality. I'd attempt engagement, suggest shared activities. He'd offer flat, monosyllabic responses while fixated on his phone. Then Elena would return, and instantly animated, friendly Marcus reappeared like nothing had transpired. I began feeling unhinged, wondering if I was imagining patterns or overanalyzing normal teenage moodiness, but the consistency was too precise, too deliberate. This young man was performing for his mother and dropping the act whenever she wasn't watching. The real explosion, the beginning of the end, started 3 months ago when Marcus requested a vehicle. Not merely any vehicle, but a $35,000 luxury automobile like his friend Connor had received for his 17th birthday. He showed me photographs on his device, discussing how all his peers possessed nice vehicles and how embarrassing it was having me drive him places in my older work truck. My truck was 3 years old and perfectly functional, but apparently insufficient for Marcus's image requirements. I sat him down at the kitchen table, attempting reasonable dialogue. I explained that $35,000 represented excessive spending for a teenager's initial vehicle. I told him we could locate a reliable used car around $10,000, something safe and dependable. I suggested he could secure part-time employment to help with insurance payments, learning responsibility. He stared at me as though I'd suggested he walk everywhere barefoot. Then his face crumpled and he fled to his room, where I heard loud, dramatic sobbing that echoed throughout the entire house. That evening, Elena was ice cold. She questioned whether denying him was truly necessary, pointing out everything Marcus had endured, losing his father, adjusting to a new family structure. She asked if it would really kill me to just give him this one thing. I was shocked. $35,000 for a teenager's first vehicle was objectively insane. I told her that, attempted explaining basic financial responsibility. She turned away from me in bed and said I didn't understand what being his mother was like. After that incident, everything changed, like someone had flipped a switch in our marriage, and suddenly I was the adversary. Marcus started having whispered conversations with Elena that would halt abruptly when I entered rooms. I'd walk into the kitchen and they'd both fall silent, looking at me like I'd interrupted something important. Elena would give me this tight smile and change subjects, but the damage was done. She began questioning me unprompted, asking if I truly liked Marcus, why he felt I was different when she wasn't around, whether I resented having him in our lives. Every time I attempted self-defense, she'd counter with, "Why would my son lie about this?" That's the trap, correct? How do you defend yourself against vague accusations? How do you prove you didn't say something mean or give someone a certain look? Marcus was making claims that were impossible to disprove, building this narrative of me as a two-faced jerk who only showed his true colors when we were alone. The fights became regular occurrences. At least twice weekly, Elena would confront me about something Marcus had said, that I had snapped at him for leaving dishes in the sink, that I'd made comments about his grades, that I'd rolled my eyes when he asked for something. None of it was true. But every time I tried to defend myself, Elena would ask if I was calling her son a liar. What was I supposed to say to that? I realized pretty quickly that Marcus was playing this perfectly, never making accusations so specific I could disprove them, but consistent enough that Elena started believing the pattern. He was building a case against me, one small lie at a time. Then 2 weeks ago, everything exploded in the absolute worst way possible. I arrived home from work around 6 in the evening, exhausted from handling a difficult client all day. Elena was waiting by the door, and the look on her face made my stomach drop. She grabbed my arm, not gentle, not affectionate, grabbed it hard enough that I knew something was very wrong. Her voice was shaking as she told me we needed to talk about what happened with Marcus. I had no idea what she was talking about. I'd been at work since 7 that morning, hadn't even seen Marcus. She pulled me into the living room where Marcus sat on the couch. My confusion turned to panic when I saw his face. He looked scared, actually frightened, eyes wide and slightly red like he'd been crying. Elena pulled Marcus's sleeve to show me a bruise on his forearm, dark purple, about the size of a hand. She had tears in her eyes as she said Marcus told her I'd grabbed him that morning, that I'd been getting aggressive when she wasn't home, that he was scared to be alone with me. My world tilted. I have never, ever laid a hand on that kid. Never, not once in 4 years. I was shouting now, desperate, telling her it wasn't true, that I'd never touched him, that I'd been at work all day, that she could check the timestamps on my badge swipes at the office if she didn't believe me. But she stepped back from me like I was dangerous, like I was some stranger who just threatened her. She told me she hadn't wanted to believe Marcus, that for months he'd been telling her things and she told herself he was just being a dramatic teenager, but the things he was saying were too specific, too consistent to ignore anymore. I grabbed her hands, begging her to really think about whether she'd ever seen me be violent in 4 years together, to consider that maybe something else was going on here. She pulled away and said that was what made it so scary, that Marcus claimed I was like 2 different people. That's when I saw him, Marcus, still sitting on the couch watching this entire scene unfold. For just a split second, maybe half a second, his expression was completely neutral, almost curious, like he was watching a science experiment to see how it would turn out. Then he saw me looking, and his face instantly crumpled into fear. He ran to his mother, calling for her, saying he'd heard yelling and begging her not to let me hurt her. That performance was what broke Elena completely. She told me to pack a bag and leave, said she needed time to figure things out and make sure her son was safe, that I needed to get out of the house until she could think clearly. I packed with shaking hands, my mind reeling, throwing clothes into trash bags because I couldn't find my suitcase. As I loaded my car in the driveway, I looked up one more time and saw them in the upstairs window. Marcus had his arm around his mother, comforting her like the devoted son. But when he thought I couldn't see his face clearly through the glass, I caught him looking down at his phone and smiling. That smile confirmed what I already knew in my gut. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a troubled kid acting out. This was calculated, planned, executed. As I drove to my brother's house with my entire life in trash bags in my back seat, one question kept hammering in my mind. How long had this 17-year-old been planning to destroy my marriage? And more importantly, why? I spent the first week at my brother David's house in complete shock. Barely eating, barely sleeping, just replaying everything over and over like a broken film reel, trying to find the moment I'd missed, the warning sign I should have seen. David kept telling me to fight back, to call Elena, to make her listen. But what was the point? She'd already decided I was the monster in this story. No amount of talking would change that. I called her maybe 50 times that first week. Every single call went straight to voicemail. I texted her begging for a chance to talk, to explain, to show her that something was very wrong with this situation. She never responded. By the second week, the shock started wearing off, and something else took its place. Something cold and analytical. I started thinking about all those little moments over the past months, connecting dots I hadn't even known were there. Marcus's perfect performance on the stairs, that split second of curiosity before he put on his terrified act. That was too smooth to be his first time. He'd practiced that. The bruise on his arm that appeared at the perfect time, right after our biggest fight about the car. Too convenient. Those whispered conversations with Elena that stopped when I entered rooms. What had he been filling her head with all those months? I realized I needed help. Real, professional help. Because if Marcus had been manipulating this situation the whole time, I needed proof. Solid, undeniable proof. I called a lawyer first, a family law attorney named Patricia Thompson, who came highly recommended from a colleague who'd gone through a messy divorce. She listened to my story without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she looked at me seriously and asked one question. "Do you own the house?" I told her yes. I'd bought it before the marriage with my own money. My name was the only one on the deed. She nodded and said that was good, that it gave me leverage, but we needed to move quickly on divorce paperwork if that's what I wanted. I told her I wasn't sure yet, that part of me still hoped Elena would come to her senses. Patricia gave me this sad smile and said, "In my experience, when someone chooses to believe the worst about you without evidence, they've already made their choice." That hit me hard, but I knew she was right. Then I did something that felt crazy but necessary. I hired a tech consultant, a guy named Brandon who'd helped David's company recover data after a cyber attack. I explained the situation and asked if there was any way to legally access Marcus's digital footprint. Brandon didn't seem surprised at all. "Teenagers leave digital trails everywhere," he said. "Social media, cloud storage, messaging apps. If he's been planning this, there's evidence somewhere. Question is whether we can access it legally." He explained that as a minor living in my house, technically still my house since I owned it, there were legal gray areas around accessing devices and accounts, especially if I could make a case for concern about his well-being. It felt invasive. It felt wrong, but I needed to know the truth. "Let me look into your phone records first," Brandon suggested. "See what we can pull from your family plan. No hacking required for that. It's your account." It took Brandon less than a week to find the first bombshell. He called me on a Thursday evening, his voice tense. "You need to see this. Can you come to my office?" I drove over immediately. Brandon had printouts spread across his desk, phone records, bank statements he'd helped me pull from accounts I had legal access to. Our joint account, the one Elena and I had set up for household expenses and savings, had been bleeding money for almost 6 months, $8,000 in total, withdrawn in increments small enough that I hadn't noticed while working 60-hour weeks and trusting my wife to manage the household finances. The charges were for gaming equipment, expensive clothes, electronics, food delivery, sometimes twice a day. All of it tied back to Marcus's spending. But here's what made my blood run cold. Elena had to have known. Several of the charges required parental approval for a minor. Bank statements showed she'd transferred money from our savings to cover overdrafts Marcus had created. She'd been hiding it from me, covering for him, probably because she knew I'd say no to that kind of frivolous spending. Brandon found something else, too. He pulled our credit report, perfectly legal since it was my credit, and found that Elena had applied for a credit card in just her name 2 months ago, right around when Marcus's campaign against me had intensified. She'd maxed it out almost immediately, another $4,000, mostly for stuff from Marcus. When Brandon showed me everything, I felt physically sick. This wasn't just Marcus manipulating his mother. Elena had been actively deceiving me, too, choosing her son over our marriage and our financial future. "There's more," Brandon said, pulling up something on his laptop. "Your family phone plan includes cloud backup for all devices. Marcus's phone has been backing up to your account this whole time." He showed me the data, deleted text messages that had been automatically backed up before Marcus erased them from his phone. Messages between Marcus and his friends going back almost a year, talking about his plan. "Mom's starting to doubt him," one message from 8 months ago said. "Just gotta push a little harder and the old man's gone." In another conversation from 6 months ago, Marcus had literally written out his strategy to a friend named Connor. "Mom always believes me when I cry. It's so easy." There were messages about the car, too, about how I was a cheap jerk who didn't understand that Marcus deserved nice things, about how once I was gone, his mom would finally sell that boring house and they could move to the city where Connor and his other friends lived. But the worst message, the one that made everything crystal clear, was from 3 weeks ago, right before everything exploded. "Almost there," Marcus had written to Connor. "Got the bruise ready, gonna show Mom tonight. This should be the final nail." He'd planned the bruise. He deliberately hurt himself to destroy my marriage, and I felt physically sick. What kind of person does this? What had I done to deserve this level of calculated cruelty? Brandon showed me more messages, conversations between Marcus and Connor about their plan for after the divorce. "Once they split, Mom will want to leave this boring town," Marcus had written. "She'll sell the house and we can finally move to the city where everything actually happens. Plus, without him around, she'll have more money to spend on me." It was all about money and location. Marcus wanted a different life, a more exciting life in the city where his friends had moved after graduation, and I was the obstacle. The house was in my name, so Elena couldn't sell it while we were married, but if we divorced, Marcus figured she'd want a fresh start somewhere else. He'd finally get what he wanted, and I would be erased from their lives like I'd never existed. I had everything now. The financial fraud, the manipulative messages, the video of him creating the bruise. All of it backed up and documented and completely legal, since it was all from accounts and devices on my family plan. Patricia Thompson looked over everything and told me this was more than enough for a divorce with a very favorable settlement. "This is actually one of the clearest cases of fraud and manipulation I've seen," she said. "The video alone is damning." She warned me, though, that exposing Marcus's manipulation might damage my relationship with Elena permanently. I almost laughed. What relationship? The woman had thrown me out based on lies without even giving me a chance to defend myself. She'd chosen her son over 4 years of marriage without a second thought. That night, 3 weeks after she'd kicked me out, I finally got a text from Elena. "Have you had time to think about your behavior?" it read. "Marcus says he's willing to give you another chance if you apologize to him and commit to doing better. We can talk about you coming home if you really reflected on what you've done." I stared at that message for a long time. She wasn't asking if I was okay. She wasn't apologizing for not hearing my side. She was demanding I apologize to the kid who'd orchestrated this entire nightmare. The kid who'd stolen $8,000. The kid who'd bruised himself to frame me for abuse. The kid who'd been planning my removal from their lives for almost a year. I texted back just 4 words. "Come over tomorrow, 3 p.m. She responded immediately. "Does this mean you're ready to make things right?" I didn't answer. Instead, I spent the rest of the night organizing all the evidence into a folder, printing out the messages, the bank statements, the credit card bills, everything. Brandon had even put the video on a USB drive for me. Tomorrow, Elena was going to learn the truth about her son, and our marriage was going to end. There was no coming back from this. Elena arrived at the coffee shop at exactly 3 o'clock. I'd chosen this location deliberately. Neutral territory, public space, plenty of witnesses. I wanted her to see everything with other people around so she couldn't make a scene or accuse me of intimidating her. I watched her through the window as she parked. She looked tired, thinner than I remembered, with dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. For a moment, I felt a pang of something like the love I'd had for her. Then I remembered 3 weeks of silence, the accusations, the way she'd chosen to believe the worst of me without question. She walked in with this expression on her face, half hopeful, half nervous, probably expecting me to be broken and apologetic, ready to beg for forgiveness. The coffee shop was busy enough for privacy, but not so empty we were alone. I'd positioned myself at a corner table where I could see the parking lot through the window. She slid into the seat across from me with a cautious smile and immediately started talking about how she and Marcus had been discussing things, how maybe if I was willing to go to therapy and work on my anger issues, we could find a way forward. I let her talk for about 30 seconds before I held up my hand to stop her. Then I slid a large manila folder across the table. She looked at it confused, then back at me. "Open it," I said flatly. She hesitated, then picked up the folder with shaking hands. The first thing she saw was the divorce paperwork, official, stamped by the courthouse, already signed by my lawyer. Her face went white. She looked up at me with genuine shock, starting to say, "We can work through—" "Keep looking," I interrupted. She flipped through the pages. I watched her face change as she saw the bank statements, the credit card bills, the highlighted charges showing $8,000 of our money spent by Marcus over 6 months. "I can explain," she started. "Keep going." Then she got to the printed messages, Marcus's conversations with his friends, where he'd laid out his entire manipulation strategy. I saw the exact moment she read the words her son had written about how easy it was to make her believe him, how the old man would be gone soon. Her hands started trembling. She kept shaking her head like she could deny what was right in front of her. "These could be faked," she whispered. "These could be faked." That's when I pulled out my phone and played the video, volume low enough that only she could hear. Marcus's voice came through clearly as he slammed his own arm against the bathroom counter over and over, creating the bruise he'd shown his mother. "This better work," his voice said from the phone. Elena's face crumbled. She dropped the papers onto the table, her hand over her mouth. She started mumbling about how he'd told her I grabbed him, how he'd cried, how he seemed so scared. "He played you," I said coldly. "For months, he systematically destroyed our marriage because he wanted you to sell my house and move to the city with him. It's all there in the messages." She was sobbing now, trying to keep quiet in the public space, her whole body shaking as she tried to process that her son had orchestrated this entire nightmare. "Why didn't you make me see?" she asked through tears. "Why didn't you tell me?" That question broke something in me. "I tried," I said, my voice hard. "I begged you to talk to me. I called you 50 times. You wouldn't even answer. You chose to believe Marcus without evidence, without even asking for my side of the story. You threw me out of my own house based on lies." She reached across the table for my hand. I pulled back. "I was protecting my child," she said desperately. "What was I supposed to do?" "You were supposed to be my wife," I said, my voice rising slightly before I caught myself. "You were supposed to give me the benefit of the doubt after 4 years of marriage. You were supposed to ask questions, demand proof, something, but you didn't, because deep down you'd already chosen Marcus over me." The truth hung in the air between us. She'd made her choice weeks ago, maybe months ago, when Marcus's whispered poison first started working on her. I was just collateral damage. That's when the coffee shop door slammed open with force. Marcus walked in. He'd apparently been waiting in the car outside and couldn't stand not knowing what was happening. He spotted us immediately and stormed over, his face red with anger. "What are you doing to my mom?" he demanded loudly enough that other customers looked over. Then he saw the papers scattered on the table. His expression changed for just a second, real fear flashing across his face before he tried to recover. "Whatever he's telling you is a lie," Marcus said quickly to his mother. "This is exactly what I warned you about." I picked up my phone and turned the screen toward him. The video of him creating the bruise was paused on the frame where you could clearly see his face. Marcus's expression went through shock, panic, then settled on anger. "You went through my stuff," he said loudly. "You had no right. That's illegal." People were definitely watching us now. "You framed me for abuse," I said calmly, "so I had every right." Elena was staring at her son like she'd never seen him before. "Tell me it's not real," she begged him, her voice breaking. "Tell me you didn't do this." And that's when Marcus's mask finally came off completely. "So what if I did?" he said, his voice getting louder. "You were miserable with him anyway. He's boring and cheap, and he's not my dad. We should have left this stupid town a year ago." Elena gasped like she'd been physically struck, her eyes darting around at the other customers who were now openly staring. Marcus kept going, seemingly not caring about the audience. All his friends had moved to the city after graduating, he said. He was stuck here because of you. She deserved better than this boring life. They both did. Once she divorced me and sold the house, they could finally have a real life. "It's my house," I interrupted quietly. "Elena can't sell it." His face went even redder. He started talking about lawsuits, about how his friend's mom had gotten half of everything in her divorce, about how there were laws. That's when I saw it, the moment Elena finally understood what her son had become. "You destroyed my marriage for money in a change of location," she whispered. "You made me believe my husband was abusing you so we could move to be near your friends." Marcus tried to backtrack, suddenly aware of all the people watching, started stammering that it wasn't like that he just wanted them to be happy together without me ruining everything. I cut through it all. "You have 30 days to find a place," I said firmly but quietly. "It's stated in the divorce papers. After that, I'm taking back my house." Elena looked at me with such devastation. "Please," she begged, "give me time to process this, to fix what's broken." But I was done. "There's nothing to fix. You chose to believe I was a monster without evidence. You let your son manipulate you for months and never once questioned it. Even now, knowing the truth, you're asking me for another chance. But you never gave me a first chance." She broke down completely, sobbing into her hands, while Marcus stood there with his arms crossed, looking defiant and angry, even though his entire scheme had collapsed around him. I looked at them, this mother and son who destroyed my trust in marriage, and felt nothing but emptiness where love used to be. I stood up from the table, gathered my copy of the divorce papers, and told them again, 30 days, then you're out of my house." Elena tried to grab my arm. I pulled away gently and walked toward the exit. Behind me, I could hear Elena's sobs and Marcus starting to argue with her, his voice rising again as he probably tried to spin this somehow, make it my fault. I walked out of that coffee shop, got in my car, and through the window I could see them still at the table, Elena with her head in her hands crying, while Marcus gestured angrily, probably still blaming me for everything even as the evidence of his manipulation sat right there in front of them. A month later, my lawyer called to confirm they'd moved out on time. They'd found a small 2-bedroom apartment across town, nothing like the house they'd left behind. Patricia mentioned that Elena had tried to fight for some financial settlement, but she had no legal ground to stand on. The house was mine before the marriage, bought with my money, and she'd been complicit in the theft of $8,000 from our joint account. David told me through mutual friends that Elena was devastated, barely functioning at work, that Marcus was making her life miserable, blaming her for not moving faster, for not selling the house somehow, for ruining his plan. Their relationship was apparently strained to the breaking point. Marcus was treating her with the same manipulative contempt he'd shown me, now that his scheme had failed and he was stuck in the same boring town he'd tried so hard to escape. Part of me felt sad about it sometimes. Late at night when my house was too quiet and I'd remember the good times before Marcus's poison had taken root. But mostly I felt relief, like I dodged something that would have eventually destroyed me completely. You can't build a marriage with someone who doesn't trust you, and you can't love someone who will throw you away the moment it becomes convenient. I'd learned the hardest lesson of my life, one that cost me 4 years and a marriage I thought would last forever.